Okay, welcome everyone. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to join us. But a very, very warm welcome to all of you to our May Centre for Autism Wellbeing Hub monthly talk. I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Georgia Pavlopoulou, Alexis Quinn, Maciej, Matejko and Venessa Swaby, and they're going to be talking about their new book, Improving Mental Health Therapies for Autistic Children and Young People. Again, I'm just going to fill some space now with some waffle while we allow people to log in, because I can see that we still have some people signing in. But yes, very warm welcome to everyone, especially those of you who are regulars, because I know we don't have our webinar in April, so it does feel like a long time ago since our last one in March. And in fact, this is the first webinar of the year where it's actually still daylight outside, which is really exciting. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am going to make a slow start and people can join us as they log on. Okay, so for those of you who might not know the team at the Wellbeing Hub, a very warm welcome to you if this is your first time with us. My name is Jo Billington and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Fiona Knott, who's waving at the moment. We also have another colleague, Emma Harris, who is currently on maternity leave but may be watching from home depending on whether or not she's her new baby daughter will allow her that. And we also have our administrator, Charlie Murphy, who many of you, if you've been booking or have questions and so forth, you may have had contact with Charlie. The Wellbeing Hub itself has a really simple aim, and our aim is to build an inclusive community of autistic people and their allies to work together to support autistic children and young people to thrive and flourish. And if you want to know more about what we do, then the easiest way of doing that is to sign up to our newsletter by emailing autism@reading.ac.uk. You can also visit our website. And if you would like to catch up on any of the recordings of our previous talks, the ones where we have permission from the speaker to publish them on our YouTube channel, we do, and that's the link to it there. And also just a reminder that everything we do, or almost everything we do, is funded through the generous donations of the university alumni and our other supporters. So if you would like to make a donation so that we continue to do this work, then please do so. Just for clarity, I am going to post these links in the chat as soon as I've finished my introduction. So if you are watching live tonight, don't feel that you have to write those down. I will put those in the chat. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So the speakers tonight are going to talk for about 50 minutes or so, and then there's going to be a 20-minute period for questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A, and I will put as many of them as I can to the panel, but apologies in advance if we don't get time to answer everyone's question. The other thing about the technology that we use Teams Town Hall, and it doesn't have a kind of chat feature. So please feel free to use the Q&A to chat, to share your thoughts and your comments and your ideas. There's usually a very lively conversation that's going on in the Q&A throughout our previous webinar, so please feel free to continue in that tradition. And also this talk is being recorded, and we will send a link out to you within the next week or so, just depending on how long it takes us to process it. But that link will be sent via Eventbrite to everyone who's registered. And before we hand over to our speakers for this evening, I just want to do a quick plug for our June talk. So on Thursday, the 19th of June, we have Pete Warmby, who's going to be talking about making an autistic living. This is actually a talk that Pete had scheduled for back in November, but needed to cancel because he wasn't feeling very well. So I know lots of people have been waiting for that date to be rescheduled. And again, in the chat, I will put in a link for how to go and register for that talk as well. But let's focus on this evening. As I say, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Georgia, Alexis, Maciej and Venessa to our monthly webinar this evening to launch their book, Improving Mental Health Therapies for Autistic Children and Young People. Georgia is an associate professor in developmental psychology and mental health at University College London. Alexis is a former school teacher, a professional athlete, an author, a psychotherapist and manager at the Restraint Reduction Network. Maciej is an autistic tutor, autism advisor and researcher, and Venessa is an autistic public speaker, mentor, author, event planner, content developer and trainer. And I just want to say that there is a link that enables you to buy this book at a 20% discount. And again, I will be sharing that in the chat. So no further ado, I just want to hand over to Georgia. Georgia. You just stop sharing that so that you can share yours.
Oh, you can see my messy. Okay. Thank you so much for having us today, Joe. It's such a pleasure. Today, I was thinking of what do I say? What do I say about this book that it took 2 years of our life to get it done, but the whole idea started a long time ago when with many colleagues I started thinking on how do we move from fixing to working on people, working with people, from fixing to mutuality. And I have used the 3 keywords of that book, which are agency, curiosity, and collaboration for that talk. I'm Georgia. I'm in the UK since 2013. I'm director of the Group for Research in Relationships and Neurodiversity at University College London. And I also work at Anna Freud Center, where we do different types of research and training. Evidentially, in every measure, life outcomes for autistic people are on average significantly poorer than those for non-autistic people. Devastating data, and that's not because of genes or of something else. It's because autistic people do not have equal opportunities in education, in relationships, in the community, in healthcare, and so on. Mental health conditions are 16 times more common in autistic children than in general population. Even before the age of 12, autistic children, we know from research, are 28 times at higher risk to die from suicide or to have suicidal thoughts. Autistic people we work with, autistic people we speak to in our research, are telling us that people are not taking them seriously when they're communicating their distress. They can be denied therapy on the basis that they are autistic. And when they have autistic hobbies, when they talk about how they want to express their joy or their focused interests, again, this can be very often pathologized and dismissed and not interpreted in a way that fits the way autistic people understand them, the way they experience it. It was these kind of things that really took me into a journey. And bear with me as I will take you a little bit into my mind around what was happening in my mind and what has inspired really that book. So when I started my PhD in 2013, when I moved into the UK, I was really surprised looking at how, as a new researcher, as an early career researcher, how other researchers have been working particularly with children and young people, but particularly with those who are neurodivergent. So very often people have been referred to and used, if you like it, in research as objects. So we do research about autistic people, but do we research with them? Do we see them as experts of their own lives? Do we really genuinely involve them in research? That was one of my first questions and dilemmas. And the second thing, it was the tyranny of the quantitative. All this kind of emphasis on numbers. And of course, we can learn so much from big population studies, but so very often numbers simplify the multiple levels of experience of human existence, of every human really, particularly autistic people who have been so much pathologized. And in so many ways, in research, often we deny agency to people. And we do that, unfortunately, in therapy as well. or in education. And all this took me into an ideological position and questioning about where do I want to be into all this, and feeling stronger about that position that says that local people of all ages, neurodivergent or not, people of all abilities, have the human right to be involved in decisions that affect their lives, in research, in therapy, in education, and in any role they hold into the community. At Anna Freud, we're training workforce mental health practitioners, and for a long time now, we know that the kind of model that the researchers are doing their research, and they are imposing kind of frameworks and systems and manuals to the clinician, who then impose it to the client, simply doesn't work. We know that because we hear so many people saying that they feel dismissed, they feel that they don't fit in, and eventually they don't get the care and the inclusion they deserve. And there are so many other gaps in understanding, really, that guided the thinking of so many of us who gathered forces to come together for that book. One of the key things, as someone who's very often researches with workforce as well as training workforce and works with people with lived experience as well, is that those who really understand autistic people when it comes to professionals very often have very little language or knowledge around psychological therapies, around mental health professional work. And then those who understand psychological therapies may not fully understand the autistic experience. So there was a gap. Why do we work side by side and not together was one of the key questions. And that led to bringing people into the book who hold both lived experience as well as being experts by science to work together. And of course, many of the autistic people, some of them are today with us today, hold both roles. And that's also very important to remember. There is such a disconnect really between systems and lived experience, as I said, and that reflects a lot on government campaigns, on different things that we see around that are supposed to help people. The language and the frameworks used by governments, by researchers, even by charities often are so very different from how people with lived experience or family members understand and describe the reality. I can just remind you the whole government campaign about being absent at school and being conceptualized as having a cold is not a reason to be absent, when we know that so many people struggle and literally die from anxiety due to many, many, many different social factors at school. Personally, as someone who has also a therapy background, a question that has been playing a lot in my mind has been around intervention. What do we call intervention? And we're asking so very often families to have to intervene. Very often we say families have to intervene early. What do we mean? What do they intervene with? Do we talk about core autistic traits? So very often, if you are autistic or have ADHD, or dyspraxia or multiple, or you might be multiple neurodivergent, you become the object of therapies. Very often these therapies focus in a way into your skills and not in the mental health. Many people, because they have a neurodivergency, they might actually be denied access to mental health therapies. And another key thing that was really, really doing my head before that book, and it's the question that I have been holding in mind, and it's something I want us as a thread to hold into tonight, is the reflections on where is the love? And that question comes as I reflect on the state of autism research and autism practice. Where is the love? After all, so many of us love our autistic friends, our autistic family members. So many of us who work in caring professions love and care and want to get it right. However, everything, systems, interventions, manuals, are so very often, and decisions that very often affect a lot of people's lives, are built on problems, on deficits, on control, on fear. And we know that because so many people have been restrained So many people have been excluded. So many people have been dismissed. And really, really what we want to communicate today, but also celebrate through this book, is the power of listening, the power of caring, the power of an experience-sensitive approach, the power and our ability to connect with each other, to learn from each other, and that kind of restores justice. So I'm talking about this kind of love that has shaped every page of this book, and it's around solidarity and justice. So I said earlier that so many autistic people will suffer bad mental health, will struggle with suicidality, self-harm, lack of belonging. But how do we get there? How do people become who and what they are? So very early in life, we are shown who we are, what we are, in the relationships that we're shaping with others and with the world. And these relationships are born into narratives. What kind of narratives shape neurodivergent people's lives? Deepest narratives about themselves in our society. I was born in Greece, and can you see this kind of labyrinth there? This is still the kind of logo that all autistic associations are having in Greece. It's the labyrinth where Theseus, the monster, is in the middle, and Ariadne, that woman with a thread, is navigating the labyrinth to go into the labyrinth and kill the monster. A battle with what? With somebody's neurology. Anglo-Saxonic cultures have not done in the past that well, you know, the kind of puzzle. The white boy that is crying inside a puzzle has been forever a symbol. Thankfully, things are changing, narratives are changing. And again, that's something that I feel that we have captured pretty well, the need to flip the narrative, to move from a neuro disorder to neuro acceptance, neuro inclusion kind of strategies in order to support autistic people who may need support with their mental health. But take a moment and think, what has been shaping your views about autistic people in the past, now? What kind of narratives are driving how you communicate with people, how you listen or not listening to different people, how we talk to people or about people? And then, if you think about research and staying a little bit more here with the narrative, so many products of research are talking about disability, deficits, disorders, impairments, and on all the things that hypothetically autistic people cannot do. And of course, we know that the research of the 10, 15 years has also flipped the narrative, not just in terms of affirmation and language, but also in terms of science about autistic people having empathy, about autistic people having skills in many, many domains, just different skills that are perceived differently. But even in cases when autistic people have better auditory skills, for example, we are very good in neuronormative neurodeficit research to flip that as a problem so very often. And it's spreading a lot. So if you think about AI, I'm still rubbish with it, but so many people are using it. And Monique Botha and their colleagues checked AI machines and looked at representations of autism and autistic people. They put all sorts of different words like autism, autistic, Asperger's, all kind of terminology that could relate. And all the pictures that came up looked something like that. What do you see here? Like dark and sad and gloomy, white, of course, and male, of course, representations of what is it like to be autistic from AI. And of course, AI is informed by human narratives. 115 years, if I'm calculating correct, of neurodisorder narratives. This has left a very big print on how we work with autistic people who might struggle with mood, with anxiety, and so on. And this is kind of a narrative that we want to flip with our book. And When we ask young people in research that we do at GRANT, the Group for Research in Relationships and Neurodiversity, young people, and we use lots of kind of methodologies that allow young people to control the agenda, to bring the themes that they want, and using tools that they want. In this case, it was photography in this paper under review. They talked about wanting to be with friends. They talked about different sensory materials and objects and situations that give them comfort. They talked a lot about video games as well. They also talk about pain, psychic pain, emotional pain, and that kind of emotional burden of being alone, of being misunderstood, of not being liked. This is a piece of work with Amy Pearson and other colleagues, again from Grant. And I give you time just to read the quote. This young person was assigned as female at birth, and they used clay to tell us, to show us the kind of pain and isolation that they feel, how separated and othered they feel in their school. But it doesn't have to be this way. And I know that so many of you are following everything that Jo and the Wellbeing Hub is doing exactly because of that kind of fresh focus and the need for change. It doesn't have to be this way. So what did we do? Since 2018, when I started working at Anna Freud, I started talking with lots of people who are experts by science, by experts by experience, or both. And I took very seriously that question that I had. How do I move? How do we move with my students, with my colleagues at university? How do we move from fixing to mutuality? And how do we do it? And whose agenda? What kind of participation? As an ally, what kind of ally I am? How much should I occupy that space? With who and how? And all that kind of hope and vision and lots of chaos I created started turning into a rigorous, very intense process. And we started progressing into a very serious business, if you like it, of deepening co-delivery and co-production, which has led to national curricula like the National Autism Trainer Program, as well as different postgraduate diplomas that we have been running, training professionals, mental health professionals. That has been far from, that has been not easy. It has been super interesting, and it would have been impossible to happen without the people who have been part of the book, all the book authors that all these years have been working with me, have been leading the way, have been pushing boundaries, have been helping me to understand how we can shift, how we can move towards a direction of compassion, of mutuality, and justice with and for neurodivergent people. It looked initially, the book looked like something like, you know, the notes that you can see in this photo of the flip chart. Lots of mess. Working a lot with young people at Anna Freud Center, young people from Maudsley, lots of soul traders, autistic individuals who had the experience and the knowledge and the passion and shared the vision, and very have been very important into that journey. You can see some of these people here. You can see your very own Jo has been since 2019 helping shaping the narrative. Alexis Quinn, Venessa, all of these people have been so important, and many of these voices have been captured in the book chapters as well. And of course, we wanted to do something, and we wanted to offer something to professionals that is evidence-based as well. So we know in the latest research that we're doing with King's, led by Professor Edmund Sonuka-Bark, in this fantastic restart team, and Maciej is also part of that team that he's going to speak a bit later and has been part of our book as well. There is so much we're learning nowadays, and we can learn from young people, thinking about how we can understand emotion, how they manage and understand and recognize emotions, and what do they need. So what we learn from research is that so very often people's emotional well-being is supported more when we connect with them, when we offer them safety and predictability and autonomy, not control. And that's there's a paradox here, because so many of the systems we're offering, applied behavioral analysis, zero tolerance behavior at school, and so on, are all based in fear and control. But young people are telling us in research that that's not how it works. When it comes to self-regulation strategies, people are telling us that these work best when they are chosen by the young person and not imposed on them. Neurodivergent youth in our recent research have also emphasized about the value of being seen, of being accepted, of being supported without judgment. And they have spoken about affirming identity and adapting environments as being far more effective than compliance-based interventions or deficit-based interventions, interventions that are trying to make you less autistic, more neuronormative social, and so on. And these kind of principles are really all being guiding and are nicely captured, I feel, in the book. And that was possible only through co-production, getting so many voices into the book to make sure that we can give that authentic feeling and result. Again, if I stay a little bit more into the research that we have been doing with Anna Freud and UCL and our fantastic partners at King's, the Restart team, we hear so much about the experience of hiding one's true self. And that's particularly true for autistic people with or without ADHD. And it's a paradox as well, if you think about the very famous theory of mind. Theory that implies that autistic people don't have empathy or cannot predict other people's feelings and so on. The latter part around prediction could be true in many cases, but the same thing applies to non-autistic people. It's very hard for them to understand and to predict what autistic people might need, feel, mean, and so on. So why does it have to be one group's problem and not autistics and non-autistic people's problem? And we know that until we start really appreciating and targeting the double empathy problem, autistic people will be hiding. Very often in our research, we found that autistic people have been also hiding their real self or their emotions in order to protect the others who love them from the intensity of their emotions. So we're not talking definitely about lack of empathy here, the opposite. An experience-sensitive approach, again, is a concept that and a thread that runs through everything we have been doing in our trainings, in our teaching, in our research, and of course, it's core part of the book. There is a paper we have co-authored with many experts by science and experience. It's open access. At some point, we might be able to circulate that with a link on the chat. And it pretty much is asking all of us to think about how we can humanize our practice and ground our practice into active listening and shape everything we do with and for autistic people. To make this book possible, we had to call out our own difficult practices, our own mistakes. We have worked with people like Alexis who are truly understanding both science and lived experience, calling out abuse, calling out epistemic violence, and helping us to understand how we can move forward, how not just identifying the problems, but also listen and care and connect with autistic people and staff in new ways, in better ways. Just to give lots of credits to the Restart team and to the young people that have been working, pushing forward research, pushing forward a healthy narrative, looking at well-being rather than deficit, looking at resilience in a way that does make sense to neurodivergent people and doesn't oppress them. And of course, we have been learning from those who are not here with us. This book is dedicated to Stefan and Friederike, who didn't find a way to be in this world because this world was very, very harsh and didn't hold them. It's all these voices that we're holding together in this book. I spoke a little bit already about paradigm flipping, and if you're interested, what does it mean to look at research or therapy from a neurodisorder paradigm versus a neuronormative paradigm, then please do read that paper. It's a lovely paper from Sunuka Bark, and it is open access. In a nutshell, aside ideological calls, if you like it, and ethical calls around, being kind and humanizing care, it's really interesting to see that there is that sense that the neurodisorder paradigm doesn't have clinical utility, doesn't serve neurodivergent people. If we think about, behavioral therapies, or if we think about cognitive training or neurofeedback in ADHD, when we target portraits of autism or ADHD, we're not really making progress because they seem not to work, even when they have very, very low or no clinical value, even in well-controlled trials with blinded outcomes and so on. So there is that sense that the paradigm, the neurodisorder paradigm, is not driving clinical innovation in the past 30 years. When we talk about the cultural side of things, then it's important, and we think of neurodiversity as a movement, then it's important to think about how the neurodisorder narrative dehumanizes people, limits people, and limits our view of people. We think of negatives of disorders rather than positives, or thinking as well as of the problems, but in terms of environmental support that people have or don't have. A neurodisorder narrative is alienating people, is stigmatizing people, and importantly, is removing agency. It's really hard to be. It's really hard to be in the world. It's really hard to take care of yourself if you don't have agency, if things are done on you. Let's think of depression. The last few years, I have been doing lots of work with colleagues at King's and UCL and other universities around depression in autism and ADHD and how we can cut down the risk of depression. So the Restart team at King's has been working into understanding and reframing how we understand depression in these populations. If we think about autism and ADHD in a neurodisorder paradigm, we assume that, there are dysfunctions with frontal limbing brain axis, other parts of the brain, or core autistic traits that are leading to emotion dysregulation. And we know that emotion regulation mediates the relationship with depression, and you get depressed. This is a kind of within the person deficit that leads to depression. But if we flip the narrative and we think in neuro acceptance, in neurodiversity terms, then we reframe disorder, dysfunction, and impairment as social constructs. And we emphasize in a more balanced way about the differences, the different strengths, the different difficulties that people may be experiencing. Importantly, we promote dignity and self-respect this way, and we seek equity, justice through accommodation. We move from within the person into the environment, and we privilege personal experience. We anchor everything we do in the life world of people. And when we engage young people of all ages, of all abilities, actually, into any kind of research, into any kind of therapy, then we have so many more chances to get it right, to make innovation, and to make it in a way that is acceptable and feasible and works for them. So what have we been doing then? How do we flip with Restart the kind of narrative around depression? We assume, after working for over 20 months with youth co-researchers, that autistic people with ADHD or both, do experience more numerous, more intense and longer lasting upsetting experiences. And this kind of challenging encounters in challenging settings lead to dysregulation, chronic stress, low self-worth, rumination, and these are core to the development of depression. This is a paper I'm very proud of. It has just been published. It's in press, actually. In a few weeks, it's going to be published. Devastating data, but it does show how how emotional burden, the concept that I just showed in the previous slide, mediates depression. And there's so much we can do to lower emotional burden. And the book, in so many ways, is telling us how to learn from young people, how to understand the emotional burnout, the emotional burden that people will be experiencing, the trauma that people will be experiencing, and how to work with them. So how do we flip this then? Support encounters, adapting settings, increasing support, training ourselves in new approaches that are co-produced with young people to manage emotions, and creating spaces that are positive, not in a toxic way, not in a resilience way, but co-produced that make sense to people. I said earlier, where is the love? Where is the love? We need to keep on looking for love. It's so easy to lose the to lose the sight, to lose love, because we get scared, we get tired, and we focus on problems, and we write reports about deficits and problems, and we might lose the person. Well, I want to believe that there is lots of love in this book. There is lots of love in the panel today, and in so many of you who are attending. So here is the love in these kind of research and practice partnerships, and in the pages of the book that we have been celebrating, and we're celebrating again today, and thank you for these opportunities. As well, lots of love in the voices of the authors that you will hear from shortly. Alexis, Venessa, Maciej, people who are building a different kind of future for autism research and for autism practice, as well as all the authors and my co-editors in the book, building a future that is rooted in collaboration, in respect and lived experience. Now, these are good things and logical things, and not rocket science either. These are simple things, one will say. These are simple things, but not easy. There are so many barriers, many of them because of our biases, because of the narrative, because of everything else happening around us. So we need to stick together, and we need to hold each other accountable about improving the way we address autistic people's mental health problems. I think that I will finish with that. Thank you again for the opportunity to celebrate the book. It's only 6 months old, and it's really nice to see that it's already in many people's offices. Many NHS services are talking about the book, are digging into the different chapters. It's a real pleasure, and we hope that it can have some impact. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Georgia. That was, as always, every time I hear you speak about love, yeah, it just it feels like you say, like we've forgotten the most important thing, and it's just so lovely to be reminded of it. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're now going to invite your co-authors to give some contribution to this evening's webinar, and really the focus here is to ask Maciej, Venessa, and Alexis about their chapters and their motivations for writing those chapters, why those chapters are so needed. And I just thought, because it's easy, we'll just do this alphabetically. So Alexis, would you be okay to start us off? Would that be all right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jo. I mean, one thing that sort of sticks out to me in all of this, and in the invitation to write a chapter, I wrote a chapter on agency, is that it really is a basic human right, isn't it? It's something I think, that we all sort of take for granted. And as George has outlined, so often, when I was growing up, I felt constrained really by the norms of those around me, and the way that schools and society was sort of dictating how I needed to think and behave and communicate. And there was this sort of constant sort of pressure, I guess, to conform to those standards. And it never resonated, you know, really with my uniqueness, which led to, you know, like many children, I guess, significant challenges at school. And I spent most of my time educated in corridors, actually. But I think the key thing here in terms of agency, which is detailed in the chapter, is that difficulty we have really freely expressing ourselves, not just our thoughts, but also our emotions, which can kind of, you know, get suppressed and then sort of jump out at different times. And that's the trauma of it, isn't it? And so often those trauma responses from what's been going on around us then get pathologized. They get called challenging behavior, when really what those are is a reaction, you know, to what's going on. And what I've understood over the years, and again, which is in the chapter, is the way that agency is restricted in ways sometimes we can barely even see. Sort of micro injurious moments, you know, the pressure that we feel to maybe, you know, sit still for 8 hours a day at school, the pressure that we feel to make that eye contact, or to speak in a certain way, or to behave in a certain way. Their expectations, we can hardly see them. So another thing that's touched about in this chapter on agency is, you know, what does recovery mean? Because this book is about mental health, and what I've sort of articulated is that, you know, the belief that recovery is not really a destination. It's actually the focus on those concepts which Georgia outlined earlier, you know, connection, belonging, but also that kind of co-regulation as well, that belief that we grow in and through our relationships, and that if those are loving, then we can attain that belonging and connection and create a sense of safety that for some of us we might never have had. So I think that the acceptance is crucial. When we're embraced, when we truly belong, you know, then we can kind of unmask and show our uniqueness. We can have communities, and that can promote a sense of completeness, so that we can be ourselves. So look, the chapter really is about agency not being a theoretical concept. It should be fundamental to our human rights. It's a fundamental aspect of our experiencing. It allows us to take charge of that narrative, to participate, you know, in shaping our futures, and, you know, really recognizing and promoting the way that if we're given agency, you know, through connection, through belonging, then actually we can transform our sort of mental health landscape, if you like, because we've got that ability to make choices, you know, and to show our strengths and to show our preferences. So I guess just to finish, I think, you know, that the chapter sort of finishes with what we need to do. And I talk about democratizing spaces, you know, fostering environments where people can feel accepted, where they can connect. Because at the moment, you know, it's too often contingent on, you know, compliance and, you know, if you don't do X, Y will happen. And I think we need to remember that children and young people, you know, need to be able to live lives that are free from that fear, you know, or from that constraint, especially in places that are professing to care for them. You know, it's almost like a kind of a gaslighting. You know, we care for you, you know, you're safe here, but actually the experience actually isn't that. It's actually the opposite. And I think that's what can kind of lead to this trauma and this stress, you know, that Georgia was talking about earlier. And then we come to understand that as challenging behavior, then we punish it even more, then we create more fear, and you can really see how this cycle can kind of be set up and be perpetuated. So that's my chapter. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Alexis. Much appreciated. Thank you. Maciej, I'd like to invite you to tell us a bit about the motivations for your chapter, please.
Thanks. I'll start by introducing myself and how I got to be involved in the book. Then I'll say a bit why this topic is important to me and what change the book will hopefully contribute to. I'm autistic, late recognized. I'm Polish and I live between Poland and Georgia, the country. I'm self-employed as an online English teacher working with neurodiverse students. And I also do work as an autism advisor and a lived experience researcher, mainly in the Restart program, which is where I know Georgia from. Not long ago, I also started making video content online. It's where I info dump about my interests, and it's quite random so far, but I'm planning to also have more neurodiversity content there. And I made a video on this book on my channel if after this webinar people are still interested in more. So I got involved with autism advocacy and co-researching through Restar. I've been involved in it since it started in 2021. In that program, me and other neurodivergent young adults and teens, we do advising and co-researching alongside academic researchers like Georgia. And basically, our role is to ensure that the project stays on track of what we wanted to achieve for the neurodivergent community. And I got involved in the book through Georgia. She approached me and others from our panel in Restart to have a similar role of a lived experience co-writer / editor advisor. I am a co-author of the last chapter, which is basically a summary of the useful information from all the chapters and an overview of a neuro-informed approach that we suggest service providers take. And that includes being neurodivergence affirming, awareness of the double empathy problem, empowerment, challenging biases, etc. I think it can serve as a good resource for therapists to come back to remind themselves of what they might want to take into account when working with us. I gotta take a sip. So there are many reasons why I wanted to be involved in the book and autism advocacy in general. I guess my story is similar to many other late recognized autistics. The label of autism helped me understand myself and gave me language to even formulate and express how I experience the world. Though at the same time, it became obvious to me that some of the knowledge that's presented as facts about us is far away from how I and many others experience being autistic, and stood in the way of me recognizing my autism sooner. And one of the main things is obviously the lack of empathy myth. I have had some frustration with not being recognized as a younger person and generally not being given helpful advice or therapy, especially when I was only starting to embrace my autistic identity. Basically, I got diagnosed through figuring it out myself and going to a specialist with this idea in mind in my early 20s. I think the chance of someone like me being diagnosed as a child in Poland in early 2000s were close to zero, for a general lack of awareness, even though now with my knowledge, the signs were quite obvious. So long story short, having grown up with various difficulties, I ended up hyper-focusing on researching autism on my own, recognizing myself as autistic, which then led to various advisory roles. And alongside that goes the topic of therapy. On the whole, I would say it's been a mixed experience for me, to be generous. At best, it gave me some somewhat useful tools to deal with my struggles and some extra insight into my difficulties. Or I had someone to talk to at difficult times. At worst, it was a frustrating, unhelpful, and invalidating experience. And the better ones are only my more recent episodes with therapy, because since I know myself more and I have the vocabulary to talk about my experience, I'm more able to advocate for myself. So looking back, as a kid, I refused to go to therapy and no one really pushed it. I think I was already heavily masking and I was scared of being found out I'm struggling inside. As a teenager struggling with depression, I didn't even really know what therapy is supposed to entail. I just knew I don't have much trust in these people helping me or understanding me. And as an adult, I did get some beneficial insights or helpful exercises, but I don't know if I ever really felt fully understood by a therapist or if I had a huge revelation in therapy. I've had to find by far most of the relevant insights on my own. So I think one of the big problems is that we don't often know how therapy is even supposed to look like, and we tend to accept ourselves as the reason why it doesn't work. I think I used to sort of overcompensate this feeling and share everything with the therapist, even if I didn't feel comfortable with it, because I thought that's what doing therapy well is like. And I only had the realization literally a few weeks ago when I was preparing for this that I don't have to do that, and it's valid not to do that. So it's probably another layer of masking I'll probably keep uncovering forever. But at least my 16-year-old self would have felt validated if he knew I'd be giving talks about this now. So yeah, I wish that younger people don't reach a place where they need this kind of support, but if they do, I hope they get competent help. I genuinely think this book can help therapists really get a bit closer to an understanding what being autistic is really like and how it looks in the therapy room. It will give therapists some good insights into what tends to work and what doesn't. And what I think is maybe even more important, I hope it will make people realize how much they don't know what they don't know about us, but they think they know. So I think that's where most of the damage and bad advice happens. I think it's fine not to be an expert on neurodiversity as a therapist, but I think we should expect them to be upfront about it. Recommend someone else, say you might not be able to do it, or maybe decide together that you might want to give it a shot anyway. It's not an optimal solution, but at least it comes from a place of honesty and a more equal collaboration. And a great example of this is Kiran and Rosalind's chapter in the book, I think, which is about a therapist admitting not knowing something but deciding to learn more. And I also think younger people can pick it up, young adults, and see that there are options that might work better for them, stories that might sound similar to theirs. And hopefully they'll get inspired to advocate for themselves more and be themselves more, whether in the therapy room or elsewhere in the world. The chapters are really varied, authored by autistics, professionals, and autistic professionals. So I think you might find something valuable there, no matter which side or sides you're on. I think that's my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Maciej. Thank you very much. And then finally, I'd like to invite Venessa to come and share information about their chapter and their motivations. Thank you, Venessa. I think you're muted, Venessa. What we can do, Venessa, if you'd like, is we can go to some questions and then you could try and log back in and then we'll come to you when you've done that again. Does that sound like a good plan? Yeah, I'll let you log back in and then we'll take some questions. Okay, so I'll just do that. Okay, so yeah, if anybody has a question they would like to pose to any of our speakers this evening, then please do. I'm just going to bring everyone back onto the screen. Yeah, please put that in the chat. We do have a couple of questions already, so I'm going to get started with those. And that is, do any of the panel have experience of or know of research about autistic therapists? Does this make a difference to the experience of therapy for other autistic people? So do you know of any research in that area, or indeed do any of you have any experience of either working with an autistic therapist or working alongside one?
I'm really interested to hear from Alexis as well. Sorry to put you on the spot, but as professional in the field, there's no really research to my knowledge. I think that many people have said anecdotally that it could help, that kind of, being with other neurodivergent people could be a way to connect. Now, that said, not all neurodivergent people get on with each other, right? I think it has to do with affirmation and inclusion. A neurodivergent person or a good ally can offer that kind of safety, can cultivate with the person that kind of safety and the accommodations they need. One could assume that autistic therapists would get it right from the start, right? Because they would be closer into the double empathy problem. They might have some experience of autistic burnout, all these different concepts. As neurodivergent, non-autistic neurodivergent therapists, when I work, for example, with people with ADHD, I very often don't disclose, or I will choose when to disclose in order to give space to people, because as well I might impose you my concept of burnout as a neurodivergent person, right? Or I might collude your experience of being early or late diagnosed with my experience. And in my experience, many neurodivergent people, particularly if they're late diagnosed, they come with so much confusion, so much fear, rage, a tsunami of feelings. And if they hear your experience, and sometimes they will want to know if they know you're neurodivergent, to learn from your experience, they might feel not validated, or they might be feeling that maybe then they are an imposter, because they look for points of reference. So I think for me it's really important when we work with others who also have lived experience, or as neurodivergent therapists ourselves, to have that space to reflect on how much of ourselves and when we will bring, when that is helpful, and when that is actually an act of, we think that we can be helpful, but we might collide too much there.
And I think for me, Joe, I advertise myself as an autistic therapist, and I think the main thing for me that clients have fed back to me, and in fact all of my current clients are autistic, is that they don't have to explain themselves. They're not explaining what autism means or how it looks for them. And I think that, as George was saying, I think the biggest thing is just being able to then sit in people's subjectivity, really sitting, with the emotion that they're bringing and staying with that. And I think, in terms of the chapter that we've sort of written on agencies, I really prioritize that probably more, I would think, than a therapist that's not autistic, because I know that so often there's a desire to understand it or to fix it or to do something with it, but actually just sitting and feeling it is the space where people can experience that connection to that emotion which has been lost, or the connection to the experience which has been looked over, or which has induced the fear, or which has induced the trauma. So for me, I think that's the biggest difference. No, you don't need to explain, and I'm much more able to sit with stuff and explore it rather than try and do something with it.
Thank you. Venessa has returned, so I'm just going to see.
I don't know.
Oh, I can hear you now, Venessa.
Okay.
Can you? Excellent. Okay, so we will come back to the questions. So do please continue to add your questions in the Q&A. But I just want to bring us back to Venessa. And Venessa, would it be possible for you to just tell us a bit about your chapter and your motivations for writing it?
Okay. Sorry, I did have it all written down, so I'm a bit flustered now.
Would you like sorry to interrupt, would you like a few minutes? We can do some more questions
fine,
if that... Okay.
I'm fine. I think just looking back and, listening to Alexis and Georgia, I've forgotten how to say his name.
Maciej.
Yeah. It just shows that from my perspective, anybody who knows me, my journey has always been very different, because I was that person where I felt very lonely, very isolated. But I think when I listen to everybody, it just shows how much that most of the time when people see me, they used to think that I was this erratic, lunatic mother, because all I wanted was for people to understand me and listen to me. So I think the chapter came about, I think, with Dr. Georgia was asking me to talk about, I think if I remember, my youngest daughter, Michaela, who is 19 at the moment. But then looking back, my son, Nathaniel, who's 22, I can see how much professionals ever listened. When it came to CAMS, it was that thing of my children didn't want to engage. That was more Nathaniel. So I always turn around and said this chapter, what it did, it was talking about autism and intersectionality from my lived experience, raising my daughter, how the system wasn't working. And I know I did the chapter with, is it Dr. Peripa? And at the time when he asked me, it was really, really difficult, because I think most of the time I don't want to keep on repeating the same thing over and over again. So I think when I did the chapter, it was more about the challenges that my daughter experienced. Was that before she was diagnosed, she was always told that she was, by her school friends, that she was mentally ill, that she was copying her brother, that there was nothing wrong with her. So when she did get diagnosed as autistic and ADHD 10 years later in 2017, 2018, I never told her she was autistic at the time because I didn't want her to feel that, as people used to say, that she probably acts on it. But what I found is that no matter who I went to, who, no matter what support was put in place, it was always blocked, it was always denied. And I always remember myself as a child that before I was diagnosed autistic, I always knew that I was very different. I knew that I was always interested in things. I knew that, you know, when I had my children, I was always told by the doctor that I was always suffering from PTSD. But I think it was a fact of not being believed, not being understood. I didn't go to no antenatal classes. So I think what the chapter did, it broke down how my daughter, you know, what she was suffering, what she was experiencing as a young Black autistic child. But then Dr. Pavlopoulou, what he did, he turned it around and said that if somebody came that looked like her, that could sit with her, could explain to her what she was going through as a, you know, a young person. But then when she got a diagnosis, what should be put in place to make sure that she saw a reflection of herself. But I have to always say to everybody, not to get twisted, that yes, I am a Black mother. Not all the time that I would say that the Black professionals got it, even if they said that they were trained in autism. And I want people to understand that just because you put somebody in that place that looks like you doesn't mean they're going to get it right. Because you got to remember, within the Black and Asian and Druid heritage communities, there are different languages, different dialects, different customs, and you have to make sure that the people that you put in front understand the culture differences within that family. You can't just turn around and make that assumption. And I think that's what went wrong with my daughter in particular, because they said that she was copying her brother. It was my parenting skills. It was because I went for domestic violence and sexual abuse. And I will say it as it is that when you disclose those sort of things, you know, you're very vulnerable and you share your journey, especially when you share it to clinicians or social services or teachers find out. That's what you find in your reports. And I think that's where it changed the dimensions, where they weren't focusing on my children, they were focusing on me. But I can look back and say why my childhood years of trauma never got resolved. So I would say it went into my parenthood, you know, looking after my children, into relationships. But I think what the chapter did, it gave me that, through my lens, is to say to anybody, if they are a Black professional, if they are an Asian professional, we got to talk about the Druid heritage community as well, is that to make sure that if you are in a practice and you get somebody, to make sure you just don't get any random Black and Asian person, to make sure that they understand what autism is. Because everybody could say autism is the same, and I can say, no, it isn't, because when somebody saw my son or saw my daughter, they saw the color of the skin, they saw the behavior, and they never once turned around, even if they had the diagnosis, they still weren't putting those things in place. So I think the chapter, what it did, Dr. Pavlopoulou put it very carefully how he did it really right, because that made a change to my daughter. But my daughter would turn around and say sometimes, it's not about the color of the person's skin. What you say is the person needs to understand her. They need to be able to listen. They need to understand what autism is. And if they don't understand what autism is, that's where she was shut down. So I think that's the perspective of me. And I always say to everybody, it's a disclaimer, this is my journey, so that nobody thinks that, oh, I'm putting down, you know, a certain community. No, this is my journey. And how I've had to navigate a system where I had to rely on white professionals, white autistic people, that gave me the voice to speak. Because if I didn't have those connections, I don't think I would be where I am now. And the chapter, as I said, what it's done, it gave a voice. As my daughter would say, she's never read it, but anybody who's met her, she is a very lovely young person, but there's still a lot of gaps in her life because she never got that support. Even now, she's still struggling, just being who she is, because she's always still, a lot of the time, I'll use that word, I suppose, masking, because she wants to fit in so badly. So yeah, that's I would say part of my chapter of the book. That's what's inspired me, is Dr. Georgia and Michael and Alexis. There's so many autistic people that have inspired me to be doing what I've done today. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Venessa. Brilliant. Thank you. So I invite everyone back now to look at some of the questions that have been coming in. So actually, there's one here that really aligns with. So we had an in-person. Every term we have an in-person special interest group for professionals who work with autistic children, and we host it here at the University of Reading. And if you're interested in attending, then please sign up for the newsletter. The next one is in November. If you can make it to Reading, then you'd be very welcome. But today it was Jodie Clark, who many of you will know, who was talking about autistic burnout. And it was a really interesting talk that she delivered. And actually this came up in her talk as well. And that is, do you have any advice on how professionals working with autistic young people can distinguish between depression and burnout? Who would like to? Maybe Alexis, could I ask you about that? Obviously, with you being a practicing therapist at the moment in this area.
I'm actually going to defer you to Georgia, because her answer is much more well rehearsed than mine. So.
Okay.
I was thinking to do the cheeky, cheesy things to say. There's a lot about that on Kieran's Rose chapter, and Julia Avnon, we have a whole chapter on depression and burnout and stigma. But I'll give a little bit more than that. Please do, Maciej, Venessa, Alexis, do jump in, please. You know, there is this concept that we have been researching the last 3 years around emotional burden, and actually we asked 600 students in England, and we found out that those who are neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, or both, are experiencing on a normal situation, on a normal day, at least twice the emotional burden that non-autistic, non-ADHD people were reporting in school, right? There is lots of nice qualitative and quantitative research, particularly qualitative papers, including Jo's Billingdon, that talk about what people are going through. There's lots of papers in masking, but it's really nice to see in bigger studies as well how the emotional burden, you know, is happening, but also how much it does predict depression. Most people will get depressed after long periods of being stressed and burnout. It's really important to know that as well they could coexist. It's really hard to be for a long time burned out without being depressed. But also you could have at some point burnout think about it as a spectrum, but the key point is these things may coexist, and potentially we need to work with the young person to understand how they make sense of different activities, of different events, of different burdens really on them. And to prioritize together. A very common way of working with depressed people is behavioral activation. And it does make some sense because it's asking you to prioritize things that can get you back into life. However, if you're burnt out and you're asking me to go and do things, if I'm burned out and have very low mood and you're asking me to go to the gym because this is going to make my mood better, or go back to an activity I really used to like, but I'm burned out, that might not work. So we need to balance ways of recuperating and ways of activating. And that there's only one accurate way to do that. You might work on IPT or CBT or DBT. All these kind of ways of work may work if they get truly authentically personalized to the person. So it could be completely different for me and Alexis, for example. What do we need to recuperate? What do we need to activate, and when and how and under which conditions? So, you know, relationships, activities indeed can get you out of the low mood. However, if you are burnt out, you will be very disactivated for a good reason, potentially for a while. So there's something there to reflect. And of course, it's important to discriminate it. There's lots about it really in the book, and how to adjust the environment, but also to before you go into any kind of medication that may or may not work depending on the needs of the person. But definitely it's safe to assume that this person has experienced trauma, has experienced stigma. Something in the environment is creating some level of burden.
Georgia, you mentioned a few different therapies there. Another question relates to that. So, do you have any thoughts about CBT being offered as a therapy to autistic young people?
Well, we need 3 webinars, I guess, for this one. How to answer that? I think that any modality can be damaging if it happens in unsafe ways, in ways that are not personalized. With CBT, many autistic people will love the logic, will love the structure, will love the agenda, and many autistic people are not going to like the fact that very often it takes you back into the logic, the cognition, the C, that is made by and for non-autistic people. So if that is not changed and challenged, it's not going to work. Many autistic people will also feel that is ableist if it's not adapted, because it's going to force people to think about behavior. It's going to force people, if a very traumatized person is called that they're having black and white thinking, or that they're rigid, or they, challenge, this kind of clinical vocabulary, they're going to feel very much invalidated. They're going to feel very, it could be very, very damaging. There are beautiful ways and beautiful principles of the experience-sensitive approach, of truly person-centered approaches, considering agency and all the stuff that are in the book, for people of whatever modality to shift, and to adapt. The other thing is that very often this kind of short-term therapies might not pay attention to relationships and to the depth that is needed for agency and for restoring and safety and so on. I don't know if I made any sense. I just put too much things, I think.
I think I think, Georgia, like as you say, it absolutely can work. I think the time limited nature sometimes, I think, often for a lot of my clients, they need sort of like a lot more time, and the very structured focus, while that can be really helpful and really useful, means that there's an attention to what's going wrong in the person's life, and a desire to kind of remedy that. And what I notice is that can kind of replicate dynamics which have caused the harm in the first place, and that actually what we need to be doing is really sitting with people, really understanding their perspective, exploring their life journey, understanding what's in the experience sensitive approach is called insiderness, what's going on for the person internally, and then the togetherness. How can we together really think about these things, and explore what might be helpful. And in that way, that does take a little bit longer time, but ultimately we're not replicating the same dynamics which might have been harmful. Not that CBT definitely does that, because it doesn't, but it's maybe more prone to do that than other approaches.
Thank you. And on the same kind of lines, actually, about having that experience sensitive approach, what Venessa was saying about really understanding the uniqueness of the individual in front of you. We've got a question here that kind of really relates to that. It says, I have ADHD. I'm a parent of autistic ADHD teens, worked in schools for over a decade in learning support for autistic and ADHD students. I'm training to be a children's wellbeing practitioner, and we use a manualized approach in sessions with young people. How do I honour my training while also honouring the young people that I meet to support their mental health effectively? So I hear this a lot from our students as well, like thinking about how do you certainly when you're kind of learning and you're training, how do you match that manualized approach to some mental health interventions with the need for that very individual personalized approach? Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
I think the whole book was really made out of, all these kind of frustrations and questions that we were having from the postgraduate people. We were also training EMHPs, CWPs. If you are into that kind of workforce, you might recognize yourselves there. I often say that, these people are coming short in the short term for you, really frustrated, being invalidated, potentially the young people and the families, you're not the first person in their life, and they have been waiting for a very long time as well. And you are very aware that you're not going to offer the pizza that they like. If you're silly analogy, you're going to give them a slice of that pizza. So make sure, and it's pizza. If you like chicken, you're not going to get it. It's going to be pizza, right? but you still have a choice to ask me. You can still ask me if I'm allergic to mushrooms and if I really want cheese. What if I like double cheese? Bear with me, maybe I'm hungry now, but you get the point. You know, give me that slice the way I need it, or let's spend our time, even by spending time to setting the agenda together, spending time to formulate together. Go very, very curious into your session. You know, visualize or ask the person what they need. The book gives so many ideas. For example, when we're trained in talking therapies, because it's talking therapies, right? Have we considered writing? Or allowing people to bring photographs instead? Can they bring recorded stuff? Because many autistic people, or many people who are anxious generally, will need lots of time to process what you say. So if you ask me today on the spot about what happened in school, I can't tell you, or I will say, I don't know. And I mean it. You know, it's not that I don't like you. Check the pace of your therapy. You know, some neurodivergent people are full of, you know, their brain is working 360, making lots of connections. You might be very slow for them. No offense, it's just different neurotypes. So there's something about really being curious and not just saying, I'm going on page 16. If you have to go on page 16 with Georgia, find out how you're going to do it with Georgia, because it's going to be different with Maciej. And I think that as clinicians of no matter what modality, we can get this right or wrong. And also, you just need to be good enough. There's not perfect or fully wrong or fully right. It's a relationship, it's a dance. And it's going to be okay if I step on you, you step on me, if it doesn't happen all the time. And if we notice that, if I say, I notice I speak a lot here, do I make any sense? Well, you know, like, you know, that attunement, that mutuality, that so very often, as Alexis said, if we get into a fixing mode and into a problem formulation kind of thing, we're missing the person, we're missing what else is happening, we're missing what they want in the moment. And of course, loads of ideas around sensory accommodations. I found out that just by letting receptionists know for everybody, because you will also have many undiagnosed autistic people, right? How to keep a low arousal in the reception, how to give all the information in the agenda 2-3 days in advance to people, so they have space via email to think, to bring answers. Or people who are known to be autistic, to be given double slots, or to be allowed to wait outside the waiting room or in their cars. You know, simple things that people feel seen. And that takes us into the previous question, you know, if you're not autistic therapist and you bother to think of these things, how restoring on its own is that? That an ally, a non-autistic person, really cared, really bothered, really wants to get it right, with the acknowledgement that they will not always get it right. Because, you know, double empathy problem is always going to be there. We will always miss each other's cues and hints and all the rest. But there's something really restoring in the fact that we try. So I think it takes us back into how we say it in the book: agency, curiosity, and collaboration, this kind of principles.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you. Well, I just want to apologise to anyone who has posted a question that we haven't been able to put to our panel this evening, but I just want to leave the last kind of 10 minutes or so of tonight's webinar to ask a final question. And those of you who've been to these webinars before will know that at the end of every webinar, I always ask our speakers the same question, which is, of all the things we've talked about tonight, if we were to go away this evening with just one message, what would it be? And it's going to be a slightly different question tonight, because what I'd like to ask our panel from each of you is, what is the one change you would like to see as a result of us reading this book? Georgia, could I ask you first?
Yeah. I hope that this book can bring lots of hope to non-autistic people who don't understand autistic people in their lives, in their workspace, in therapy. I think this book is made because of this kind of almost unreasonable faith and love and trust in what humans can do with other humans. There's something, we said about lots of dramatic stuff that are really true, actually, and really sad. But it doesn't have to be this way. And we know what people need, and people in need know what they need. So what's the gap there? We need to listen more. I think that if people come together more curious about each other, there's so much that any kind of modality of therapy can do. This is something we hear a lot from the authors in the book, from the people we work with. So maybe believe that you can be, all of us, each one of us can be a person that can make a difference, that can be curious, and that can listen actively a little bit more every time.
Thank you, Georgia. Venessa, you're next on my screen. Would you mind letting us know what your one change that you would hope for?
I wrote my one down so I don't go off topic. I would say, from my perspective, it's making sure that when you read the book, as Georgia said, it just gives hope. I would say inspire any person out there who is being challenged by the challenge, because you have to remember there are some parents who are the ones that refuse to accept that the person or the child is autistic. So my thing is to walk away, and from my perspective as a Black mother, to realize that not every behavior is based on bad behavior, because of the color of my skin. Don't make the assumption, I would say, and dig deeper. And there's a lot of people in the book who know who to signpost, if you are struggling with somebody in the ethnic minority communities.
Thank you, Venessa. Thank you. Maciej, you are the next person on my screen, so I wondered if you might go next.
Yeah, I also wrote down my answer. Now that I look at it, it's a bit chaotic, but I hope it will make sense. I have 3 different categories of hopes. First one is for therapists, then for autistics, and for autism research and advocacy on the whole. So for therapists, I hope they approach their clients with less presuppositions and they become more open-minded. I hope this book gives them awareness of masking in the therapy room, of double empathy, which we mentioned today. I hope it will help them ditch the old myths about autistic people, if they still have them, like the myths of no empathy, the stereotypical aloof male view of autistic people, and so on. And for autistic people who read it, I wish it helps them develop an awareness that you may have options and that the type of therapy you've been doing so far is not necessarily the best option for you, especially if you've struggled, no matter what the therapist says to you, and that it helps people be more assertive of their needs. And lastly, for the field as a whole, I think a collaborative way of working, as for this book, is the way forward for research on neurodivergence and making a societal change. And I'm thankful to the Restart team and Georgia specifically for taking us along to collaborate on different projects and events like this. I consider myself to be lucky I got to be doing this, and I think at the same time it's gonna become, and it is becoming, more of a norm. And what I mean is collaborating with regular people who benefit from a given research and treating their insights seriously. I think in research and creating autism knowledge for a long time, we weren't treated seriously as we're not professionals. And then even those of us who did become academics have been treated with suspicion, or as people who are biased in our own case, as opposed to the purely objective neurotypicals, of course. I'm not a professional researcher, and I don't know if I want to be one at the moment with the barriers and biases in place. Nonetheless, I think there should definitely be space for people like us to influence research and practice and speak our truths. And, this book and the different projects we mentioned definitely contribute to that. So for me, I'm just finishing. Maybe the big takeaway from this is the sense of self-agency for us that this book conveys, and the ability to self-advocate. And that's both on the level of advocating for ourselves in our daily lives, in therapy, but also on this meta level of co-creating autism knowledge. We have to be part of it for it to really represent us and be helpful for us.
Thank you, Maciej. Thank you. And then finally, Alexis.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that we just need to focus on offering a different kind of relationship. You know, it's not necessarily what you do with the manuals or the approaches or whatever it is you're engaging the person in. It's how you do it. And if you can do it by recognizing and valuing the person rather than doing to the person, then people are hopefully going to be in a position to have and experience some kind of healing from the relationship.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy to hear you all tonight. I've had the great fortune of spending lots of time with many of you over the years, and it's always just such a pleasure to hear from you and to hear your wisdom. So thank you so much for coming this evening and telling us about this fantastic book. We've seen in the chat, I hope you'll have seen there's people saying how excited they are about reading the book, how it needs to be in schools, especially secondary schools and universities. So I hope that the messages in the book are going to be reaching a much wider audience than simply just thinking about therapists and clinicians and so forth, because I know that was your intention for this book to have much wider appeal. Because mental health, of course, is about all of life, isn't it? So, yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, tonight for joining us. And a big thank you as well to all of those who are going to be watching this at some point in the future. I know that many people sign up for our webinars and don't watch the live broadcast, but they do watch the recording later. So special hello to you as well. So thank you very much. Please sign up to our future talks. And again, if you want to know what they are, or you want to know anything about the Wellbeing Hub and what we're doing, then email autism@reading.ac.uk. But once again, thank you so much to all of our speakers, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. So good to see you.
See ya.
Everybody.
Bye, Vanessa. Thank you.
It's all right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You're very welcome, Maciej. Nice to see you. Bye. Okay.